Hi, it's Jung. I'm back because I wanted to share some additional information with everyone about what you can do after chemical weapons exposure, as well as some aftercare. And I know that I included this in the previous episode that I recorded with Randy, but wanted to make sure that it was in its own bite-sized episode so that folks were able to access it more easily and more quickly. Um, so, to cover some basics around chemical weapons exposure, this is something that has been coming up because of the presence of ICE and Customs and Border Patrol agents here in the Chicago area, and their use of these weapons against protesters, both at the Broadview site that Randy and I talked about and discussed on the previous episode, as well as in residential areas where folks may not be protesting, but just going about the activities of their daily lives. So, tear gas and pepper spray, which are two types of chemical weapons, are frequently referred to as gases, but they are actually composed of very, very fine powders, which means that instead of dissolving or instead of kind of evaporating into the air, they are something that stick to bodies and stick to objects, as well as settle on surfaces after they're used. Um, Most of the research that shares a lot about long-term impacts of exposures to chemical weapons um, are done. Most of that research is done in places that have repeat exposures, ongoing exposures. But I also included in the episode notes some anecdotal evidence that reporters have gathered from Broadview residents about physical irritation from secondary exposure, which means that chemical weapons were used in the area and are still lingering in the air. I assume that this is likely to be the same for residents of the Brighton Park neighborhood, as well as potentially in Logan Square, where chemical weapons were used in more residential areas. But those haven't necessarily been shared through the news. I can share for myself as someone who was on the ground at Broadview and didn't experience direct chemical weapons exposure there, but did experience secondary exposure from previous chemical weapons use. That when it got windy or there was a breeze, I was definitely experiencing symptoms of sore throat, a little bit burning eyes, and coughing. And then when I was on the ground in Brighton Park, I experienced primary exposure to chemical weapons. So was there when they were being used, and so experienced the symptoms that are frequently associated with that type of exposure. So runny nose, tearing eyes, burning, and a lot of discomfort and like psychological disorientation. So, in the Chicago area, ICE and CBP officers have primarily been using two types of chemical weapons. They've been using pepper balls, which are shot out of what's called like an airsoft gun, which looks super similar to a paintball gun. They're also really similar in diameter to paintballs and similarly meant to explode on impact the way that paintballs do. The term pepperball itself is trademarked by a company called United Tactical Systems, or UTS. And this company is located in Lake Forest, Illinois, which is just north of Chicago in Lake County. And the Chicago Reader, which is one of our local news outlets here, printed a story a few weeks ago in late September, revealing that the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, had purchased $1.7 million in supplies from UTS that are either pepper balls, pepper ball guns, or other related equipment. So that's one type of chemical weapon that that ICE and CBP have been using. The other type is called CS gas, and this has been used in a variety of canisters and different smoke colors and is manufactured by a company called Defense Technologies. So some of the canisters are whole canisters. They come in one part. When they are used, they stay in that one part. And then others are in three parts that are meant to break apart into three different parts to increase the area that the smoke and gas can reach. So when they get to their high temperature, they'll break apart and then be able to scatter the CS gas kind of in a bigger radius. And I've included pictures of both types of those canisters that have been photographed here in Chicago so that you can see examples of what they might look like. Um, if you know, see them in your neighborhood or want to just search for more information about them based on the pictures or the logos. Defense Technologies as a company, it's a US subsidiary of a company called BAE Systems, which is a UK company. They are a defense company and have a history of contracts with countries like Saudi Arabia for use of BAE's weapons in Yemen and with Israel for use of BAE's weapons across occupied Palestine. I also wanted to mention that the use of CS gas is banned during times of war by the Geneva Conventions, but it has been approved in various places around the world for things like crowd control and riot control, very loosely defined. So the risk of injury from these weapons can come both from the powders that are in them, the gas or the pepper powders that are in them, as well as from the projectiles themselves. The balls or the canisters can cause injuries, even if they are not giving off the powder or the gas. So before I move into ways that you can treat or provide aftercare, I wanted to mention that even though there's no universal prevention for pepper spray or pepper balls or tear gas attacks, there are a few things that you can do to reduce harm or risk of injury if you know that you're going to be in a place where chemical weapons might be used against people. And these are things that I do as a protest medic, just to make sure that I'm able to treat as many patients as possible hopefully without getting injured myself. So these things include wearing long sleeves and long pants, wearing long socks and closed-toed shoes. This can be uncomfortable because it can get really sweaty, but it also protects your skin and covers your skin from possible attack. Also refraining from wearing contacts, lotions, face paint, and heavy sunscreens because the powder will get stuck in these creams or between your contact and the surface of your eye. It can be really painful. It can be really hard to remove on site when these weapons are deployed or when an attack happens. And if you can, wearing goggles that are airtight, kind of stick to your face, and then a P100 or better type respirator face mask. And that's the kind of reusable face mask, or that's the kind of, non-disposable face mask. But if that type of respirator face mask isn't available, I would suggest definitely wearing the best disposable that you can find rather than going without anything. So if you are in the vicinity of a tear gas attack or are near where pepper balls have exploded, there's a few things that you can do. So the first one is to move yourself and others away from where the powder has exploded as calmly and as quickly as possible. If you run, it can both create panic as well as cause you to breathe more heavily, which can, when you're breathing more heavily, it can let more chemical into your lungs. And this can increase the amount of pain that you're feeling. Also, if you're dealing with a tear gas canister, you could potentially put something over it to prevent the spread of the tear gas powder, something like a cardboard box, which would like keep it contained. Or I've seen people use traffic cones. And if you were going to do that, then you would also want to pour water around the perimeter of the traffic cone, as well as through the hole that's in the top of the traffic cone before moving to fresh air. Um, and if you have like really thick gloves on or are prepared to do this as an action, you could also throw or kick a tear gas canister away from you or away from the crowd before moving to fresh air, but also knowing that this comes with high risk of injury due to the temperature of the canister. And it could also come with high risk of charges if the way that you are kicking or throwing the canister is like back in the direction of the officers um, who deployed it against you. So it's just to know those things and to keep them in mind. Um, so next I'm going to share some things you can do to treat tear gas or pepper ball exposure, both immediately, kind of on the scene, as well as in terms of the aftercare. So immediately on the scene, what you want to do to treat tear gas or pepper ball exposure is to tilt your head all the way back. I demonstrated this in the other podcast video conversation that I had with Randy. You're going to tilt your head all the way back like this. And then either kneel or squat if you need to lower the level of your face or your head. I'm short, so I'm regularly asking people to kneel or just get lower than me so that I can reach up to their faces rather than having them stand next to me. And then you're going to take a water bottle or a bottle of water that has one of those like sport tops. And starting at the inside of the open eye, you're going to squirt a direct and steady stream of water like this, kind of while you're moving that water bottle outwards. And a few things I wanted to mention about this, because the way that you do this is important to how well it can be used for treatment. So it's going to be temporarily painful, but it's important to hold the eye open, and this can help you effectively remove all the debris. So remember, it's a powder, a really fine powder that's settled in. And so if you have your eyes closed, which is definitely going to be your like natural instinct, especially if you're in pain, you want to either hold the eye open or have someone hold the eyes open so that that water can get in there and kind of flush everything out. Um, and then remember that it's not necessarily the composition of the liquid, so what's in it that's most important. It's actually the impact of that water stream moving the tiny powder particles. So that's why you start at the inside and then move outwards, because you're hoping that like the gravity will do its best to like have a stream of water outwards. And that's why I recommend water as being the most effective way to do this. So mixes with Maalox or baby shampoo, they haven't necessarily been found to be any more effective than water on its own. And if you're using milk, it can be harmful because of how quickly and easily it might spoil if you're like carrying it outside for a while, as well as you don't know if the person could have an allergy to milk or a sensitivity to milk. And it could irritate kind of like the inside of the eye more than water would. So that's why I always recommend water. It's usually cheaper and more widely available than any other like DIY mix that you also might make yourself. So I doing that until the pain subsided, and then trying as much as possible to not worsen things by rubbing your eyes. So that's what you can do immediately after exposure. And then in terms of aftercare, I would suggest removing the clothes that are soiled or that may have been exposed as soon as possible, and putting them in a plastic bag. A grocery bag is fine, and tying that up and setting it aside. Some people would say that you can leave that for about 48 hours before you wash it to, like, quote unquote deactivate the powder, or just let it subside, which I have heard anecdotally, but don't know if it is completely truly helpful. But it definitely doesn't hurt, especially if a child or pet is not going to get to that bag of clothing. Photograph any visible injuries that you have, whether this is from redness from your eyes, irritation on the face, irritation from exposure anywhere on your body, or an injury, direct injury from the projectile that was used, whether that's a pepper ball or a CS gas canister. Try to shower quite soon, and wash your hair with cold water. Now, using cold water will decrease the likelihood that your pores will continue to open, which would just make it a lot more painful, because it means that, like, the CS gas can just get more into your body. And then if you have long hair, I would suggest washing it upside down so that the runoff of it isn't getting into your eyes, isn't, like, going over your face, or isn't going down your back. Um, and then to, of course, like, engage in some supportive general aftercare. So rest, hydration, having nutritionally dense foods. I especially suggest liquids that are going to be soothing to your throat. And, you know, I'm sure if you've had a sore throat before, you will know what that means for you, whether it's soup or tea or water. Um, but yeah, whatever that may mean for you, whatever might be cozy and supportive for you. And then in the days following, I would suggest refraining from wearing any heavy lotions or creams for the next 2 to 3 days, because your body's going to be continuing to, like, try and get rid of any powder that was exposed to. And if it gets trapped under those creams or skins, then it might cause additional pain. Similar to your initial exposure, or it could cause a rash or other skin irritation. And then, even if you are not a person that typically goes to the doctor, if you're like, I'm going to tough it out, I'm going to see what happens, I would suggest to make note of all the symptoms that you experienced kind of from the time of your exposure to at least like 3 to 5 days after, and to seek additional care if needed. And that helps to start a paper trail of evidence that, like, you were impacted by this chemical exposure. So whether it's throat irritation, cough, nausea, headache, rash, hives, dizziness, interruptions to your menstrual cycle in any way. These are some of the symptoms that folks have reported as being delayed from initial chemical weapons exposure, or potentially happening from secondary exposure as well. And especially remember that all of what you're experiencing can be compounded um, if you have any sort of chronic conditions like asthma or heart disease, any autoimmune conditions, or a post-viral illness like long COVID. Something that hasn't been talked about, but that I think is important to discuss or suggest because of the world that we're living in, with an ongoing COVID pandemic, as well as an annual flu season, is to wear a KN95 or equivalent type of disposable mask for 5 to 7 days in indoor public places, if you're not doing that already, after your chemical weapons exposure, because, of course, that sort of exposure is going to impact both your immune and your respiratory systems. And so it could increase your risk for transmission of something like COVID or flu, especially through your nose or your throat. So I've included some additional pictures for you. I have included additional links for episode notes or for further reference. So I hope that this is helpful. I hope that you don't actually need it. But because we are living in times where these chemical weapons are being used in time in ways that we can't predict, I want to make sure that everyone is at least prepared with the information and the knowledge that can help them spread calm and support others if you are exposed. So be safe and take care. Thank you.